Today's lesson is sailing through a plastic soup, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to talk about environmental pollution. I guess you could describe this as a sort of water pollution. And this is the plastic floating in the Pacific Ocean. And if you go there on a boat, you will be sailing through a lot of plastic. You could describe it as a plastic soup. Kind of soup. Of course, you don't want to eat that soup. Again, we're talking about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a large area in the Pacific Ocean where there's a lot of plastic floating on the water.
Exactly right. Yes, it's of course a big problem. Very difficult to clean up. You can't really blame any one country or something for it because, of course, this garbage is collected from all over the world, or at least all sides of the Pacific, and maybe even come over from other oceans. But it is sitting there, and of course it creates all sorts of problems, both in the water with water pollution and also polluting the fish who might eat some of the plastic, and then the fish who eat those fish, and it can end up in the human food chain as well. So it is definitely up in everyone's interest to take on this huge challenge of trying to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Let's find out all about it in our article. Sailing through a plastic soup, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Picture yourself sailing across the bright blue waters of the North Pacific with clear skies and calm seas. You might expect to come across fish or perhaps a dolphin breaking the surface. Sadly, however, you're far more likely to encounter something else these days: floating pieces of trash. The North Pacific is home to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a massive collection of man-made waste, including plastic bags, soda bottles, old fishing nets, and more. It lies within the North Pacific subtropical gyre, a system of ocean currents that covers over 20 million square kilometers. The gyre's circular motion traps floating items and pushes them toward its center. They then gather in one of two large masses, one near the western coast of the US and the other near Japan.
大家好，标题中介绍名词 patch， 它的意思是与周围不同的区域，也可以是小块土地的意思。例如 The man wanted to use the patch of land behind his house to grow vegetables. 该男子想用他家后面的那块地来种菜。或者 The cat slept in a patch of sunlight beneath the window. 猫睡在窗户下方的一片阳光下。接着看到形容词 man-made， 表示人造的或是人为的。例如 There's only one natural lake in my hometown. The rest are man-made. 我的家乡只有一座天然湖泊，其他都是人造的。或是 The radar picked up an unknown man-made object on its screen. 雷达在萤幕上扫到一个不明人造物体。
Okay, so again, we're talking about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. A patch is just an area. If you have a farm, for example, you might have a pumpkin patch where you have a bunch of pumpkins. And here in the first paragraph it says, picture yourself sailing across the bright blue waters of the North Pacific Ocean with clear skies and calm seas. So imagine that you're doing this. Picture yourself in a boat going across the North Pacific, which would be probably north of Hawaii, maybe near Alaska or something. And it's a great day for sailing. You've got clear skies and you don't have big waves there. It's calm seas. You might expect to come across fish or perhaps a dolphin breaking the surface. Or maybe if you're even luckier, you can see some humpback whales or something like that. You might expect to come across these things, which means you kind of encounter them by accident. You weren't really looking for them. They just suddenly appeared there.
Exactly right. Yes, that's kind of the thing you'd expect to see, right? Fish in the ocean, maybe some dolphins, that kind of thing. Not too surprising. Sadly, though, it says, sadly, however, you're far more likely to encounter something else these days: floating pieces of trash. So that's sad news, right? This is something we don't want to hear, is the reality of the situation. Yep, fish and dolphins, less likely. Garbage, plastic bottles, things like that floating on the ocean, more likely. likely. That's what you're likely to see there. The North Pacific is home to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So that's what we're talking about. A massive collection of man-made waste, including plastic bags, soda bottles, old fishing nets, and more. So that's what you will find there if you ever, for some reason, travel out there to see the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. There's a massive collection of man-made waste. So this is not sort of biological waste. This is not, little fish bones or bits of seaweed that have been stirred up by storms or whatever. It's man-made waste. So it's artificial. It's not natural. Something man-made has been made by people, or more likely, of course, made in factories, but it doesn't grow. It's not a natural part of the environment. And this man-made waste is all stuff that, as we know, made of materials that's very cheap, but also break down over a long time. They don't just disappear naturally like biological things would. Plastic bags, soda bottles, old fishing nets, and more.
Right, so those are the things that comprise this waste that is floating on the ocean. And where is it? Well, it lies within the North Pacific subtropical gyre, a system of ocean currents that covers over 20 million square kilometers. So that's where it lies, that's where it is. It's in this place called the North Pacific subtropical gyre, which I believe is like something that is spinning in the ocean. It's kind of like a spinning ocean current. And yes, indeed, it's quite large. It covers over 20 million square kilometers. So if you use the word cover here, it just means it occupies that amount of area. So it covers a large area there in the North Pacific Ocean.
The gyre's circular motion traps floating items and pushes them toward its center. So yeah, as Roger explained, a gyre is like a circular motion of water or wind. I think you could probably think of a tornado as a gyre, or even like when you let the water out of your sink or your bathtub, that sort of spinning motion of the water as it goes down the drain. You could describe that as a gyre. So it's a circular motion. It goes in a circle. Circular being the adjective of something that is a circle shape or a form or something like that. So its circular motion traps floating items, things like plastic garbage, things that float, and pushes them toward its center. So that's why it's all sort of clustered in one area, because once you kind of get trapped in these rotating circular currents, the garbage can't sort of escape and float off in other directions. It all gets stuck in one place. They then gather in one of two large masses, one near the western coast of the U.S. and the other near Japan. So actually there's two Great Pacific Garbage Patches. The problem just got twice as bad. So they gather in two large masses. A mass is just a very large amount of something. There might be a mass of garbage left on the road after a big celebration or a big street festival or something like that. You might see masses of leaves sort of piled on a lawn as someone is raking up the leaves in the fall or something like that. So it's sort of an undefined large amount. So these two masses, these two patches, we could also say when talking about the garbage in this case. One is near the western coast of the U.S., so not far off the coast of California and Oregon and Washington State, and the other near Japan. So apparently not too far from here in Taiwan.
Kind of surprising that the Japanese would put up with that. We all know they love cleanliness. And that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's now listen to the second part.
While many intact objects can be seen floating in the garbage patch, most of the debris consists of tiny fragments. Unlike organic materials, such as wood or natural fibers, plastics never completely decompose. Instead, sunlight gradually breaks them down into smaller and smaller pieces. Over time, they become so small they're almost invisible, turning the water into a cloudy plastic soup. This plastic soup is highly damaging to marine life. Larger animals can become tangled in abandoned fishing nets or mistakenly eat the plastic. To a hungry sea turtle, for example, a plastic bag looks like a tasty jellyfish. And as the plastics break down, they not only give off toxic chemicals, they also block sunlight from reaching any plants below, thus severely disrupting the ocean's sensitive food chain.
第二部分看到形容词 intact， 它的意思是完整无缺的，或是未受损伤的。例如 Even though Luke dropped his cup, it remained intact. 虽然 Luke 把他的杯子弄掉了，但它完整无缺。也可以说 The package arrived in perfect condition with its contents completely intact. 这个包裹以完美状态抵达，其内容物毫无损伤。继续介绍名词 debris， 表示垃圾，也可以是碎片或是残骸的意思。可以说 After the typhoon, the roads were covered with debris. 台风过境后，道路上布满了垃圾。又或者说 Construction workers cleared away the debris from the building. 建筑工人清除了该建筑物的残骸。下一个看到动词 decompose， 它的意思是使分解或是使腐化。例如 George threw his leftover vegetables onto the compost heap to decompose. George 把他没吃完的蔬菜扔到堆肥里分解。再看一个例子 You could smell the leaves decomposing on the wet forest floor. 你可以在潮湿的森林地面上闻到树叶在腐烂的味道。再来，我们看到形容词 marine， 指的是海洋的或是海生的。举例来说 The reef is home to a variety of marine life. 这片礁岩是多种海洋生物的栖息地。又或者说 The marine biologist spent years studying the behavior of dolphins. 那位海洋生物学家花了多年时间研究海豚的行为。最后看到形容词 tangled， 它表示纠结在一起的、纠缠的，也可以是复杂的。可以说 Mia tried to comb through her hair, but it was too tangled. Mia 试着梳理头发，但头发都纠结在一起。最后一个例子 The yarn was a tangled mess after my cat was done playing with it. 我的猫玩完纱线后，它们变得乱七八糟。
Okay, it's time for us to discuss the second part of our lesson for today. It begins by saying, while many intact objects can be seen floating in the garbage patch, most of the debris consists of tiny fragments. So it is true that you can see a lot of intact objects. You can see them floating in the garbage patch. That is true. If something's intact, it is whole. It's in its complete state. It has not broken down. Maybe, for example, your country was hit by a storm or something, but your house is still intact. Okay, it was not damaged by the storm. It's still standing. It's still in one piece. And so you can see bottles and things floating there. They have not broken down, but still you've got lots of debris there, which is kind of waste, smaller pieces or fragments of things. They're smaller parts of things. And yes, indeed, some of those objects are not intact. They are smaller. They have been broken down.
Exactly. These consist of tiny fragments, and fragments are basically very, very small pieces of something that was formerly whole. If you drop a glass on a hard ground, on the hard floor, it will break into many fragments, many small, small pieces. So that's basically what this garbage is made up of, waste or debris in very small pieces. Some of them will be intact. You might see a bottle, but you also might see the shiny bits of what was formerly a bottle that's now broken down under the sunlight and then the seawater to just little pieces of plastic. Unlike organic materials such as wood or natural fibers, plastics never completely decompose. So it's not good to have any garbage in the ocean, but if it's an organic material, if it's wood, natural fibers, if you throw a cotton t-shirt or something like that into the water, it will eventually break down over time. Plastics, though, being made of oil and being very artificial, very unnatural, they never completely decompose. They never completely break down organically in the same way that animal bodies or food or anything like that will decompose. It will rot. Nature will take care of it. It will be broken down and sort of absorbed back into the natural world, into the water or the ground. Plastic never does that. I think I read somewhere that a plastic bottle can last 500 years.
Oh, no.
If you just leave it in a garbage dump or something like that, and the ocean would be very similar.
Indeed, and I did want to mention that here the word plastic is being used as a countable noun because we're talking about different kinds of plastic. Plastic is usually non-count, but here we're talking about different kinds. There are different numbers for plastic. If you recycle the plastic, you can look for the number to determine the kind of plastic it is. But they don't completely decompose. Instead, sunlight gradually breaks them down into smaller and smaller pieces or smaller and smaller fragments. Okay, so the sunlight shines on these floating pieces of plastic, and then that breaks them down. If you break something down, you just make it smaller and smaller. You divide it into smaller and smaller parts or smaller and smaller pieces.
Over time, they become so small they're almost invisible, turning the water into a cloudy plastic soup. This is just awful. So yes, over time, the sunlight and other things will break these plastic pieces into smaller and smaller pieces, so small they're almost invisible. They're almost unable to be seen with the naked eye. You might be able to see some if you get a sample of the water and look at it with a microscope, but if you just sort of look at the water or even hold a handful of water, you wouldn't really be able to see many of these plastic pieces. They turn the water into a cloudy plastic soup. So it might just look like dirty water, but all of those little bits of dirt or sand or what you think is floating in there is actually plastic. As it says, this plastic soup is highly damaging to marine life. It's not healthy to eat plastic. I don't think we really need to explain that much more. Marine life, though, is just things that live in the ocean. So everything from jellyfish and sea stars to little fish to sharks to tuna to anything that lives in the ocean, any animal that lives in the ocean or vegetable thing like seaweed or whatnot, that would be marine life. Plastic is really bad for living things.
And larger animals can become tangled in abandoned fishing nets or mistakenly eat the plastic. So if you're tangled in something, you're just kind of stuck there. To be tangled usually means you've got string or hair or whatever, and they're wound around each other. They're not straight. You might have tangled hair after you go swimming, so you need to comb your hair so it's straight again. And the animals get stuck in those fishing nets which are abandoned. The fishermen just left them floating out there in the ocean. And then, of course, the fish can eat the plastic by mistake. For example, to a hungry sea turtle, a plastic bag looks like a tasty jellyfish. I think we've heard of that before. You got a plastic bag floating in the ocean. The turtle sees it. Ah, jellyfish, lunch! And it eats it. And, of course, the plastic gets stuck in the turtle's stomach.
Absolutely, eventually starving the turtle since it doesn't have enough space inside to take in proper food. And as the plastics break down, they not only give off toxic chemicals, they also block sunlight from reaching any plants below, thus severely disrupting the ocean's sensitive food chain. So this pollution just goes on and has all sorts of bad effects. Almost anything that it touches over time will be badly affected. So these toxic chemicals that are released when the plastic breaks down, so as the sun and the wave action and other things break these plastic fragments down, they give off or they emit, we could also say EMIT, they release toxic chemicals, toxic meaning poisonous. If something is toxic, it's generally harmful to living organic things, things like poisons and stuff like that. So they give off poisonous chemicals, and that will, of course, will end up in the water and also end up in the fish that swim and eat in that water. And they also block sunlight from reaching any plants below. I suppose that could be the chemicals and also that plastic soup. It doesn't allow sunlight to go down and reach corals and seaweeds and other grasses that are growing there, providing food below the surface of the water on the sea floor. So that's another problem, and that severely disrupts the ocean's sensitive food chain. So it really messes up with the natural course of things in the ocean, the things that keep the ocean healthy and the animals in it. It disrupts all of that stuff that's been happening over millions and billions of years. Nature was not designed to handle plastic in these quantities. If something is disrupted, it's disturbed, it's stopped from doing what it should normally do, it's interrupted, I guess you could also say, but basically you're kind of messing with the way things should be going.
Right. For example, I could say the earthquake caused landslides which have disrupted transportation networks on the East Coast. So here, of course, they disrupt or interrupt the ocean's sensitive food chain, and we're at the end of the second part of our lesson. Let's go on now to the third part and wrap things up.
Unsurprisingly, cleaning up a problem of this size and scale presents huge challenges. Current cleanup methods are both incredibly expensive and extremely slow. What's more, they also risk causing even more harm to the local marine life. At present, the best solution seems to be to try to convince the world to cut down on plastic and switch to using biodegradable materials. In other words, to kill the garbage monster, we must, first and foremost, stop feeding it. All right, here we are back with the problem of ocean plastic in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It says, unsurprisingly, cleaning up a problem of this size and scale presents huge challenges. Yeah, what did you read? It's 20 million square kilometers.
Pretty darn big.
It's really, really big. And cleaning up something that big presents or gives us huge challenges. It poses huge challenges or huge problems. It gives us these things that we have to deal with if we want to try to do it. First of all, it's the size. Current cleanup methods are both incredibly expensive and extremely slow. So they do have some people out there. I've seen some young entrepreneurs and inventors coming up with like giant vacuum cleaners and things like that. That is part of the cleanup. Notice their cleanup is one word. We're using it as a noun, and it's not the clean, one word up. Another word, verb phrase that we'd use, I will clean up the bathroom, or you might have to schedule some time for cleanup at the end of the party before you go to bed or something like that. Time to clean something up. It's incredibly expensive and very slow and, of course, very challenging because you're doing all of this hundreds of miles from land out in the middle of the ocean. And also, who's going to pay for it?
Yeah, and there's going to be a big storm as well, so it's very hard to do this. What's more, or in addition, also, furthermore, they also risk causing even more harm to the local marine life. So they may end up doing more harm than good. At present, the best solution seems to be to try to convince the world to cut down on plastic and switch to using biodegradable materials. So yeah, we can't really clean it up. We basically need to cut down on plastic. We need to reduce the amount of plastic waste we produce. To cut down on something just means to reduce the amount of something. Here, would you like to have a cigarette? No, I'm trying to cut down. I'm trying to quit. And in this particular case, yeah, we should stop using so much plastic. And I guess there's some new discoveries for biodegradable plastic that can break down more easily and return to the environment, but I haven't really heard any that is economically viable. Nobody wants to pay for this.
In other words, to kill the garbage monster, we must, first and foremost, stop feeding it. Yeah, that's a good way to summarize this. In other words, kind of stating it in another way, maybe a way that's more easily understood. To kill the garbage monster, or to clean up the garbage patch, we must first and foremost stop feeding it. Yeah, to kill the monster, don't feed the monster, and then the monster will slowly fade away and die. That is what you must do first and foremost. That's kind of like your first step, the first basic thing you must do before you try to have some complicated way of cleaning it up. Let's just put less plastic in the ocean, because even if we do clean it up, if we continue to use plastic the way we do now, it will just reappear. So that's a good reason, if you need one, to recycle as much as possible.
It sounds like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Let's nip it in the bud before it becomes a big problem, but we still have that big garbage patch to deal with out there in the Pacific Ocean, and maybe there are other ones in other oceans as well. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们今天要来练习文意选填的题型。那我们先快速的浏览题目的10个选项。 A 可以念作 present 或者是 present。 那么当单数动词的时候，它是念 present， 表示呈现提交。那么当复数可数名词的时候是念 present， 可以表达礼物的意思。 B waste 可以当动词或名词，当动词表示浪费，当名词表示浪费或废弃物。那么 C invisible 它是形容词，表达看不见的、隐形的。 D circular 是形容词，表达环状的或圆形的。E abandoned， 我们先看 abandon 这个动词，表示遗弃、抛弃，在这边有可能是过去式或过去分词。那过去分词也可以当形容词来描述是被遗弃的、遭弃用的。F organic 是形容有机的。G covers 它可以是单数动词，表达覆盖、遮住或者是涉及。它也可以当复数可数名词，那这时候是指遮盖物或者是盖子等等。 那么 H come across 它当及物用法呢，可以表达偶然碰见、无意间遇见。那它还有不及物的用法，这时候可以表达使产生什么印象，或者是某个想法它被清楚的表达了解的意思。那么 I give off 表示散发、释放，那么后面通常会接像光线啊、气味、气体等等的。J masses 它可以当单数动词，那这时候是指聚集、集中。如果是用来当复数可数名词，可以表达大量、众多的意思。好，那么看完选项，我们就来做题目吧。第一题它写到说 You might expect to空格 fish 那空格前面是 you might expect to， 后面则是接了名词 fish。 从句子结构来看，空格应该填入原形有及物用法的动词或片语动词。符合的选项有 be waste， H come across， I give off。 那么课文前一句要我们想象在北太平洋的海上航行，那语义上来看，这题答案应该选 H come across， 去表达你或许会期待看到鱼类，偶然碰到鱼类这样子。好，那么第二个空格呢，是出现在 Great Pacific Garbage Patch 太平洋垃圾带后方的这个同位语 A massive collection of man-made 空格。我们从句子结构判断，空格里面应该填入名词。符合的选项有 A presents， B waste， G covers， 还有 J masses。 那根据语义，正确答案要选 B waste， 去表达它是一大片的人造垃圾。好，那么第三个空格我们看到是出现在 A system of ocean currents that 空格 over 20 million square kilometers。 从句子结构判断， A system of ocean currents 它后面接了 that 引导的形容词子句，那么空格是位于主格关系代名词 that 的后方，然后之后又接了 over 20 million square kilometers。 我们这时候可以判断空格里面应该配合 a system 去填入第三人称单数动词。那符合的选项有 A presents， G covers， 或是 J masses。 根据句意，只有 cover 可以搭配范围面积，所以正确答案选 G covers， 去表达说覆盖面积超过2000万平方公里。再来看到第四个空格，它这边写到说 The gyre's 空格 motion traps floating items and pushes them toward its center。 空格前面有 gyres， 后面有 motion， 那根据句意，空格里面要填入可以搭配 motion 的形容词，用来说明将漂浮的物体困在其中并推向中心，所以符合的选项只有 D circular 来描述它的运动模式是环状的。那第五个空格是出现在 They then gather in one of two large 空格。好，那么句子结构来看，这个空格应该填入复数可数名词。符合的选项有 A presents， J masses。 根据句意，答案应该不会是礼物嘛，所以这题应该选 J masses。 我们用 two large masses 来指两大片垃圾聚集区。再来第六个空格，那这个句子是说 Unlike 空格 materials such as wood or natural fibers，Plastics never completely decompose。 从句子结构来看，空格应该填入形容词或是可作为修饰的分词。那符合的选项有 C invisible， E abandoned， 还有 F organic。 根据句意，相较于这个无法完全分解的塑胶，句子前面讲的应该会是有机材料，那正确答案是 F organic。 看到第七题 Over time, they become so small they're almost空格。那这个句子其实省略了 that， 它原本是写作 They become so small that they're almost……那从句子结构判断，空格里面应该填入形容词或者是可以作为修饰的分词。符合的选项有 C invisible 和 E abandoned。 根据句意，正确答案应该要选 C invisible， 去表达它们变得非常小，以至于几乎看不见。第八题他提到 Larger animals can become tangled in 空格 fishing nets。 空格前面是 become tangled in， 后面则是名词 fishing nets。 根据句意，这个空格应该填入形容词或者是可以做修饰的分词。选项里面只剩下 E abandoned， 那它也符合文法还有语义，表达说较大的动物可能会被丢弃的渔网缠住，所以它是正确答案。再看到第九题 And as the plastics break down, they not only 空格 toxic chemicals, they also……那么空格前面是 they not only， 后面接了 toxic chemicals。 那这句的时态是现在式，所以空格里面要填入有及物用法的原形动词或片语动词。选项里面只剩下 I give off， 它符合语义，也符合文法，表达说随着塑胶分解，它们会释放出有毒的化学物质。再看到第10题 ，Unsurprisingly, cleaning up a problem of this size and scale空格 huge challenges 空格前面是动名词片语 cleaning up a problem of this size and scale 那之后是 huge challenges 我们这边可以判断空格里面要填入第三人称单数动词选项里面就只有 A present 符合文法跟语义表达说清理如此规模的问题呈现巨大的挑战所以它是正确答案好那以上是今天的讲解我们回顾今天单字吧
Patch A patch of flowers grew in the middle of the field. Intact. Despite being knocked over by the earthquake, the vase remained intact. Debris. The powerful storm left debris all over the streets. Fragment. Fragments of the broken plate were scattered all over the floor. Marine. Marine animals like dolphins and sea turtles live in the ocean. Tangled. They spent hours trying to separate the tangled ropes.Toxic. The factory released toxic chemicals into the river. Disrupt. A loud noise from the hallway disrupted the meeting.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.